Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Larry Long. This is today's guest is Bernie Mayer with Creighton, and Bernie was to be up front. Bernie was one of my professors when I did my master's at Creighton University, and I thought it would be very interesting to go over some of what Bernie has talked about in his book Beyond Neutrality. So first, Bernie, if you want to introduce yourself and just kind of give a little background, then we can start with those 10. And the first one is and these are 10 beliefs that are in the book. And so it talks about that we believe that we're neutral. That's the first one. But go ahead, Bernie, introduce yourself if you would, please.
Well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me, Larry. I'm a professor emeritus at Creighton. I haven't actually been on the active faculty since 2020, uh, but I did teach at the Werner Institute for 14 years or so. And then I was also a founding partner and long-term partner of a mediation and conflict intervention firm called CDR Associates out of Boulder, Colorado. And my deeper background, even though I taught in the law school, my background's in mental health. So I worked in all sorts of different conflict situations that way. And I live right now in Canada. I live in a little town called Kingsville, Ontario, which is on the north shore of Lake Erie. And it's not far from Detroit. So that's where I am.
Okay, well, let's start with the first one that we believe that we're neutral.
So these 10 beliefs that get in the way are what do they get? Let me just start by saying what they get in the way of. They get in the way of us being as effective as we can in the major conflicts of our time. Whether and who we are, in my view, is people who are conflict specialists who understand our role as understanding, studying, working, and intervening in conflict. And the problem with the being neutral, that we believe we're neutral, is well, there's several, but one major one is it's kind of meaningless. We can, it's very hard to define neutrality in a way that makes sense, and it means something very different to everybody. But if it means that we will do nothing to affect the outcome of a dispute in one party's favor or another, that's impossible. Everything we do has an impact. It's also impossible to be completely impartial because we all bring to the table our life experiences and values and beliefs. Doesn't mean we always have to share them or or make them front and center what we do, but they're always present, and people know it. And and the idea that being neutral is what gains credibility, I think, is a very narrow concept because uh, we really gain credibility by having experience, by being committed to helping people, by being authentic and transparent, by doing what we say we're going to do, being who we say we are. And so I've said for a long time that depending what role I'm in, that my job here isn't to impose my beliefs about what should happen on you, but it's to help you have the conversation you need. But I bring to the table who I am, and that's why you're hiring me. Um, Maybe just to say one other thing, I think we've used neutrality in many ways as a cover for things that are important. But neutrality itself is just a confusing concept. And a lot of the most important roles we can play in conflict are roles where we are on one side of a conflict or another. It's not just coming into the picture as a in between kind of third party.
Okay, the next one is competition is bad.
Yeah, that's a very funny one, I think, because in a later book I wrote, The Conflict Paradox. I have a chapter on competition and cooperation, which says you can't have one without the other. Um, it's naive. In many of the conflicts we're working on, and we could talk whether in our communities or in organizations or in the world, uh, competition is part of the picture. If competition is all it's about, which it never is either, then that's a problem. But I think the real skill that it takes to be effective in conflict is to help people compete in a way that doesn't prevent cooperation, and cooperation in a way that recognizes that there's a competitive aspect what we do. Another way of putting it in more technical language is there's always a distributive and an integrative part of conflict where it's about distributing the goods or services or desired outcomes that are available between people because there is a somewhat limited supply, and integrative is looking for a way for creative solutions that allow people to meet their most important needs.
Well, for the last 21 years, I worked for the federal government Environmental Protection Agency, and we actually called ourselves federal shared neutrals. So, but most of what we did was environmental disputes, and a lot of it the regulatory stuff. So, and I don't want to get into it right now, but we talk about a little bit of circularity. And one of the things that I talk about a lot on my website is objective criteria and how to create objective criteria to find solutions, which brings us to the next one. Our goal is win-win.
I, yeah, well, that's related to the competition and cooperation. Of course, we would like to come out with outcomes that work for everybody, but choices have to be made. It's not just about win-win. Hopefully, it's not just about win-lose, and hopefully, it's not just about compromise. But our goal is got to be based in reality. And if we go in there thinking all we have to do is talk about your interests and my interests, and then we can come up with we can we can deal with the orange so one party gets the peel and the other party gets the meat. Well, that's just not how real life is. There are choices that have to be made. If it were that simple, then the work would be a lot more simple.
Right. The next one is interest is in, position is out.
Yeah.
We're going to go to Yuri and
Right. Well, my friend Bill Urey has written a wonderful book with Roger Fisher initially, but then he wrote Getting Past Snow and a variety of other books, um, where the fundamental message is you just have to deep enough into interests and avoid positions, and then you can come up with win-win solutions. The thing about interests are, first of all, I think sometimes they lead us into too transactional an understanding of what conflict is about. They prevent us from looking at a whole different dimension of conflict, which is that we can understand by asking the question, why do people act against their own interests all the time? Because they do.
they do, most definitely.
And so I think the answer is because there are other things at stake. Um, and one of the other things at stake are identity issues. What gives us meaning? What makes us feel we're part of a community? Um, what articulates our sense of autonomy? Um, and and the other thing that often motivates us is just a sense that our survival is under threat, whether it is or not. And, I was just listening to a podcast with Ezra Klein and Fareed Zakar, I can never pronounce his name right, Zachariah, anyhow, forget my bad pronunciation. And they were talking about why is it, what's behind the MAGA movement? And they were very much saying it's not interests. It is people's sense of their community and their identity and what gives meaning to their lives. So I think we have to understand that. But the other problem is that the difference between positions and interests isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's much more about how we say things, how we frame them, how we present them. Any interest can really be stated as a position, any position can be stated as an interest. For example, it's really important to me that in a divorce, that kids get a stable continuity of their school. And I want to figure out what a solution to that is. And another way of saying that is they got to stay in the same school they're in. And so I think the more fundamental two questions are, one, how do we frame what our concerns are? And two, how deep do we go into the motivational structure? And because every time you state an interest, you can say, well, why is that important to you? And then you can go deeper and deeper, and pretty soon we're talking about all of our existential angst or unresolved edible complexes or something like that.
Yeah, we used to with a lot of the environmental disputes that we had a lot of people that applicants that wanted a permit so they could pollute. And they didn't see that the standards for the water quality standards benefited them until we pointed out the point. It's like in a mine. A lot of what they're putting out there are metals. Those metals are money. And so their incentive to pollute went away to the fact that you're losing your profit out there. So once we brought that into their, because their position was they wanted a permit regardless. And so once we showed them that, yeah, you're losing money, then their position changed. So, but the
And
next
of
one,
course, you could just take that one. I've often done that in training as an exercise. Well, why is it that they want the permit, and why is it they want it regardless? And then you keep digging, and or if if we don't see that interests aren't the whole story, number one, and number two, interests are just a sort of first dig into people's motivational structure, then we're
so
missing a lot.
did we do respect Trump's anger?
We didn't.
Okay, yeah, that's where that's the next one. I'm losing my place here. Okay. Yeah, so the next
um,
one is respect Trump's anger.
right.
And most of these are very passionate disputes. And I sometimes I just let people go out and just totally vent, get their anger out. And that's what, most of the trainings were like, but get your perspective on that.
Well, I, there's a couple things. Just what you said. If I've seen so many mediations where people really suppress emotions, and I would say if I look back on the mediations in my life where I feel like I did not do a good job, it was almost always because I was trying to control things too much. And I don't think the mistake was ever that I asked people to tell me more about how they're feeling. I think there's a trick we often use in mediation, which is to recognize the strength of an emotion and then to ask people to tell us how they're feeling. The interesting thing about that question is when you're asking somebody to tell you how you're feeling and why, you're actually asking people to take a cognitive approach to their emotions. You're not asking them just to scream and yell and jump up and down and you know,
Think about what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's saying, I want to understand it. You're really angry, and that's cool. You tell me about it. It's so that's one of the issues, I think. And the other thing is, I think it's not like I want people to act gratuitously disrespectful, but I think we have to watch out our tendency to want to make things too nice and to focus too much immediately on problem solving stuff because these emotions are really important. They motivate people staying in conflict, but they really can quickly turn to help people really want something better for themselves.
Yeah, and that led perfectly into the next one. We have a university here in Georgia that offers a PhD in dispute resolution. And one of the things I've worked with a couple of these people, and one of the things that they always come out and say is that most of the time people just want an apology. That has not been my experience. So the next one that we look at is that good relationships are goal, adversarials our problem.
Right. Well, look, it's not like I want everybody to be adversarial or not to have good relationships, but people haven't signed up with us often, depends on the dispute, to have good relations. They've signed up with us because they're unhappy about something and they don't like what's happening. And damned if they're going to want to have a come in there to think this is about having a good relationship. If they can talk about what their differences are, they can say what they have to say, they can understand each other, and uh, they can improve their relationships fine. But if we go in there with that as that's what we're all about, we're often at odds with the people we're working with. And they see themselves as adversaries, and we have to help them to be competitive. It gets back to that one, if you want to think about it, to advocate for themselves and to talk about how they disagree with each other in a way that leads them to a constructive next step, if possible.
I agree. So we're starting to run a little short on time, but I'm going to put the next two together. We offer a level playing field, and conflict resolution is a process. I quote you a lot by saying that power is the currency in a dispute. And so, uh, I use that a lot because I talk on my website. I do talk a lot about power and positioning and stuff, and that is very important. So I also talk about a systematic process that we use to resolve environmental issues. So expand a little bit more on that because you talk about a separate process from practice for the process.
Well, let me say one thing about power. I think the concept of balancing power is way too simple and primitive for us to understand, or even creating a level playing field. Almost virtually any playing field you're on has got some ways in which it advantages one side or another. And power is almost never equal. I mean,
Never equal.
we can talk about you were just in the Ukraine. Talk about balancing power in the Ukraine. What the hell does that mean? And power is a very complex concept. There's so many different kinds of power. And what our job is to help is, I think, to help everybody use in a constructive way use their legitimate sources of power. But if we think we can balance power, um, I don't know what that means. I really don't. And I don't I think what you have to ask, what do people really want? They don't want to be run over, and they want to be helped to be able to be as effective as they can in interaction. But that's not about balancing power. And you know, we are in the field of helping develop processes. That is part of what we do. Our interventions are partially about process. But when we used to train people, I don't know if I ever did this in the courses you were in, and we would come up with the stages of mediation or the stages of negotiation. I always tried to get my co-trainer to teach that part of it because I didn't like it. Because I thought the idea that we go through stages is a is very misleading. I think instead there is developmental tasks, is how I thought about it, that you do have to accomplish, but in what order and how it happens. I think what we are involved in is a very dynamic, adaptive, complex system of interaction with people. And it's not just about process, it's about using our gut feelings. It's about taking the time to really connect with where somebody is at. It's about, if somebody comes up with a agreement with somebody else early on in the process and they do it through an exchange of positions, great. We're not there to stop that from happening. If we get to the very end and we think it's now just a time to talk about implementation and a whole new thing happens, well, that's what happens. And we have to handle it in a way that just doesn't think there's a simple process that accomplishes it. So just to take your statement about standards and objective criteria that you mentioned earlier, I don't want to misquote you, but that's a very effective tool, but it doesn't always work. And sometimes, in fact, people are so focused on other stuff that if you are absolutely committed, no, that's what we must do now, you lose the plot.
They get so
Other
focused on the
times it's
process.
brilliant.
Yeah, they get so focused on the process, they don't see how to resolve it. So that has been, yeah, that is true. That is very true. So we're looking at 25 after, and I know you wanted to talk about uh, mediation in difficult times. If you think you can wrap that up in 5 minutes, otherwise we can reschedule and do another one solely on that.
Well, I don't know if I can completely wrap it up in 5 minutes, but I would rather say the mediation in difficult times and conflicts. I would say, what is our role as conflict practitioners in the major conflicts of our time? That's partly why I wrote Beyond Neutrality, because I thought often our most effective role was not as mediators, but in other ways, as coaches, even as advocates, as helping work within a team, within a group of people. And I also think in the times we're in, which are so polarized, we have to ask ourselves, how can we most help deal with some of the issues right now that are, or the dynamics that are keeping us so separate? And I think there's a lot we can do, but almost all of it requires that we be out front about our values. And I think it's a lot easier for me, for example, to sit with people who have very, very different points of view than me, if I'm very much willing to listen, but also if I'm willing to say, well, here's where I'm coming from. And I actually think the skill of listening is really a big one and a challenging one, but in some ways, even harder than being a good listener is speaking our truths in a way that doesn't drive other people away. And figuring out how to do that from whatever role we're in, with whatever group we have access to, is is something that is a challenge for us, but I think we have a lot to offer and contribute to that. And maybe I'd just say, that we could look at a lot of different conflicts. I'd love to hear you talk about your experience in Ukraine, for example. But I'm Jewish, and I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and I am very, very unhappy and troubled by how Israel is behaving right now. It distresses me, and I've had lots of conversations with people about it. I think some of the most valuable things I could be doing right now is to kind of work with people and talk to people within my own community about it, because there's a lot of pain there. and the attitude of the North American Jewish community about what's happening is one of the important dynamics in what happens. But the other thing that I have done and will continue to do is to work together with some very close Muslim friends of mine to talk about areas of agreement and disagreement and to put that out there together, which I've done some of. And to me, that's just a small bore view of what needs to happen in a much larger way. But I think maybe that's all the time I have to talk about that right now. Am I right?
You've got a few more minutes, but I would like to, I'd really love to talk more about the Israeli Palestinian conflict. And
We can talk. I can spend a few more minutes of that if you want.
yeah, I would, well, I would probably need to schedule another interview if that's okay with you. So,
Yeah, we can do that
um,
at some point.
because you're a very interesting man. I enjoyed your class to no end.
Was that
And
the
I do
dynamics
reference
of
you a lot.
conflict class that you took?
Oh gosh, it was 2010.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's
I would have to go back and look at my transcripts to get the name of it. I remember you, and I remember Noam were my that and professors that left an impression.
yeah.
So and I guess Hanson
Noam's
went.
one of the people I've had interesting conversations about Israel with because he grew up there.
Yeah, yeah. I think he still lives there, doesn't he?
No, he lives in Florida now,
Oh, okay.
but no, he did live there then. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've reached out to him to get an interview with him. I haven't heard anything back yet, but
Well, his father recently died, and I think he's dealing with that in Israel. Last I heard from him. So
okay. That's all we have for today. Be sure and go in if you like this conversation and subscribe and like it. Hit your like button. That's how I get my points. And we will be back with another one, hopefully in a little while.